All right, great. Thank you. Thank you all for that presentation. I think all speakers should, if they can turn on the video, that would be great. It's Marina and Tom as well. Okay, let's start with a question for Monika. How engaged have the communities been? Have they previously tracked their own local data? Was there a demand for action? I think you work with the Pollution Control Board. So how was that? Was it response to community action requests? How would you explain that?
Sure. So our entire project has been community driven. And Minneapolis and St. Paul, as I said, does have a lot of environmental justice areas. And as an agency, that is something that we are very interested in working with. We also have a disproportionate amount of point sources or facilities in those areas. And whenever they come up for permitting action, we do hold public meetings and things like that. And we constantly hear frustration from the community that we aren't doing enough for air quality. So we thought this project would be a good chance to kind of get into the community where people and neighbors are really engaged in kind of finding more about air quality. So right from making a decision of where to place the monitors, we've always had engagement and input from the communities. And as I had mentioned in my chat, we have all of the data streamed on our webpage at PCA. So people do kind of go to that page, look at what's happening in their neighborhood, at least on a monthly basis. So our data gets updated every week. And it's current till last Tuesday. So people are definitely looking at it. The city of Minneapolis is interested. We meet with the environmental health folks quite often. We do have another presentation with them coming up next month to discuss the results and see how we can help them with facilities and permits and general air quality and things like that.
Okay, great, thanks. I think that's a good segue to Marina and Carlos. So you went into the casinos and did these measurements. What was the reason to go into these casinos, and did you ask for permission from the casino owners?
Can you guys see me? I'm not sure. I can't see myself.
No, I can see you.
Okay, perfect. We went to the casinos. We wanted to focus on the indoor specifically because it's one of the only places in Vegas that allow indoor smoking. So that's why we were interested in the casinos. And no, we did not ask for permission. That's why we kept the casinos private.
Another thought on that, part of the reason why we didn't want to single out any casino is just for the fact that we were really just interested in just a casino overall. We weren't trying to single out any casino to see what their air quality was in comparison to others. We just wanted to see what the PM2.5 concentrations would be within a casino, so we decided to test just random 6.
Okay, great. And sticking with the Nevada State team, I probably pronounced Nevada badly, but so what's the difference between measurements and exposure? I assume the exposure is based on the measurements, but how do you get from measurements to exposure?
So what we kind of wanted to see what the actual distribution of the different concentrations was as well. So we, as the histogram showed, we tried to, we were really interested to see how the measurement would affect the exposure. So if you think back, I wish I could go back on it, but that particular bin that I pointed out to had just a percentage of the overall measurements that we did for that casino. So out of all of the measurements we took, by the way, a measurement every second, and we spent about, on average, anywhere from an hour to an hour and 40 inside of these casinos. It varied by casino, obviously, but so we had a lot of data to work with, and we wanted to see what where these PM2.5 concentrations were falling into. So that's why we did the exposure and the measurements as well. So for that graph, 45% of those measurements fell within that bin range, and then 50% was the exposure. So obviously the measurements affect the exposure because it's over time, but we just wanted to see the distribution between all of those measurements.
Oh, I see. So the exposure was actually a fraction of time in that concentration.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. One more question for Carlos. Do you consider relative humidity in your calibrations, or did you calibrate for different relative humidity conditions?
We unfortunately did not calibrate for the relative humidity, but we were measuring it at the same time as we were measuring the PM2.5. That's kind of something that we were hoping to look into as far as for environmental parameters are concerned. And unfortunately, we just haven't had the time to really go through the relative humidity data and see how it will affect the PM2.5, which we know it will. We just haven't had the chance to go through that data yet.
Okay. Marina, do you want to say something?
No, he said.
Okay. Monika, a question for you. Why did it take so long to decide on sensor locations in Minneapolis versus in St. Paul? I mean, I would think that since you're with the Minnesota Pollution Control Board, you would have greater access to facilities, but you can talk about the challenges in such a deployment.
Yeah, so initially our plan was to put everything up on Excel poles because, the streetlight poles we assumed are there everywhere and we would just get access to it. So we don't have to be restricted in terms of location. But as we kind of started working out on contracts and things like that, there were liability issues and contract and right of way and all of that, because there were so many different entities that were involved in us just going and touching poles and things like that. So in Minneapolis, it took much longer just for all of those logistics to play out. And then for the technician to kind of get time to go and inspect each and every one of the 32 poles that we had in Minneapolis to give us a thumbs up whether we can or we had to look at an alternative. In St. Paul, we just had to work with the director of St. Paul Public Schools and then just pick a school and individually just give a heads up to the superintendent and we were fine. So that was much more smoother. So our St. Paul installs were almost 5 to 6 months ahead of the Minneapolis ones.
Okay, great, thanks. One more question for the Nevada State team. Did you consider sensor exposure to traffic? It would seem useful to put sensors on both sides of the street to pick up the effect of local traffic.
So if you think we were interested in what a tourist would be exposed to if they would go on to the Las Vegas trip. We weren't really looking to see long-term concentrations for either side. We did decide to actually walk on both ends of the street as well, just so we can try to get, because there are obviously different size casinos and there's different foot traffic. So we did walk on both sides so we can try to see what the differences would be between them. But again, we have not gone through all of the outdoor data yet that we have. So that is something that we are looking into.
Okay. And I guess that question can also go for Monika because you are using the street lights. So have you deployed any, for example, streets with sensors on both sides? Are there streets with street lights on both sides? I guess is the question.
Yeah, they are. So they're staggered on both sides of streets. But since we wanted to keep the focus on communities, a majority, I would say like almost 90% of my poles are within really thick, dense housing neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods. But we do have some that are closer to intersections and things like that. And as we do expect, we do see higher NOx and higher PM in those areas. We have actually presented, I mean, I did present these results very recently, earlier this year, to the Met Council, and they're, all of them are transportation related folks. So they were really interested in looking specifically at, if they can use this data for doing anything for road design or anything like that. But I don't think that we have enough data to kind of point towards anything to say on effect of traffic. But in schools, for sure, we do have the sensors that are located within parking lots, and those are quite often really close to where the buses kind of idle for drop off and pick up. So we are waiting to see if we can do something around schools and modifying how that whole bus system works.
Okay.
I hope that
Great,
answers.
thanks. Yeah. Otherwise, Jerry, I think, can ask his question again specifically in the chat, and I think the online discussion will have that. Will have an ability for you to respond as well. I guess I think we're pretty close to wrapping up, and probably one final question for Carlos and Marina. Now that you have these measurements, I mean, we heard Monika talk a lot about how she's using the data to use it for various city government planning purposes. Now you have these data that is collected in stealth mode from the casinos. What do you think you can do with it going forward as sort of a community action?
Well, I think part of in order to really see what's to involve the community in the first place, we kind of need to see what the actual conditions are. So that's part of the reason why we're doing it on the strips, because just for the concern of not just the tourists, but obviously the people who live here. We wanted to see what they kind of were, so that we can see what we can try to go ahead and fix, or any changes that we can make or propose to these casinos and city officials themselves, so that we can go ahead and try to make our air quality a lot better. Marina did mention that a lot of these tourists do spend a considerable amount of time inside of these casinos, especially in the smoking areas. So before we talk to officials, we wanted to see just what the concentrations looked like.
Marina? Any thoughts?
Yeah. I'm sorry? Yeah.
Oh, any thoughts? Go ahead.
No, I agree with what Carlos said.
Okay, great.